From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Like everybody else, I think I'm pretty happy with the decision for them to step in. I know that maybe it's not the end of the battle, but at least today, you know, we celebrate a small victory. You know, there are still things to be considered, and I think, at least for me, it appears that they want to do things fairly.
In a dramatic series of moves on Friday, the White House intervened in the ongoing fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, less than an hour after a federal judge rejected the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's request for an injunction against the U.S. government over the pipeline. We'll go to Standing Rock to speak with Standing Rock Sioux Chair Dave Archambault and with attorney Jan Hasselman, who brought the tribe's case to federal court. We'll also hear more voices from longtime Native American land and water protectors, including Lakota grandmother Deborah Whiteplume, on why they're fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline.
It pushes us further over the tipping point of not only fossil fuel extraction, but the desecration of Mother Earth and the exploitation of Native peoples in the area, as well as the threat to drinking water.
And last Thursday, the state of North Dakota issued an arrest warrant for me for criminal trespassing. This after a Democracy Now! Special broadcast from North Dakota showed the Dakota Access Pipeline's guards unleashing dogs and pepper spray against Native Americans attempting to protect sacred tribal burial sites from bulldozing.
These people are just threatening all of us with these dogs. And that woman over there, she was charging them and it bit somebody right in the face.
The dog has blood in its nose and its mouth.
And she's still standing here threatening you.
Why are you letting her dog go after the protesters? It's covered in blood. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Obama administration has ordered a halt to construction on part of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline, which has faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and hundreds of other tribes from across the United States and Canada, in what's being described as the largest unification of Native American tribes in decades. In a dramatic series of moves late Friday afternoon, a federal judge rejected the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's request for an injunction against the U.S. government over the pipeline. Then the Army, the Department of Justice, and the Department of Interior responded with an announcement that the Army Corps will not issue permits for Dakota Access to drill under the Missouri River until the Army Corps reconsiders its previously issued permits. The news was welcomed by the protesters who've gathered along the Cannonball River by the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation to resist the pipeline's construction. This is Francine Garreau-Hall of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe.
I am very grateful because in our government-to-government relationship, the federal government is bound by treaty law to protect our interests. And I'm glad that they stepped up to the plate today and did that.
The agencies also asked Dakota Access to voluntarily cease construction 20 miles east and west of the Oahe Dam. In other Dakota Access Pipeline news, last Thursday, Morton County, North Dakota, issued an arrest warrant for me. The charge, criminal trespass, a misdemeanor offense. The case, State of North Dakota versus Amy Goodman, stems from Democracy Now!'s coverage in North Dakota over Labor Day weekend of the Native American-led protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. On Saturday, September 3rd, Democracy Now! Filmed security guards working for the Dakota Access Pipeline Company using dogs and pepper spray to attack protesters.
These people are just threatening all of us with these dogs. And that woman over there, she was charging them and it bit somebody right in the face.
The dog has blood in its nose and its mouth.
And she's still standing here threatening you.
Why are you letting her dog go after the protesters? It's covered in blood. Democracy Now's video report went viral online. Our footage was rebroadcast on many outlets, including CBS, NBC, NPR.org, CNN, MSNBC, and Huffington Post. Also charged was Cody Hall for his alleged presence at the September 3rd land defense action and for a subsequent protest on September 6th. Hall is considered a lead organizer in the movement against the Dakota Access Pipeline and was arrested at one of the checkpoints that have been erected by North Dakota authorities to restrict access to the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation and the growing pipeline opposition camps. Hall was denied bail and remained in jail throughout the weekend. Hall's attorneys and several others we spoke to confirmed it's highly unusual for a defendant charged with misdemeanor trespass to be jailed and denied bail. According to the complaint, the charges are based on a viewing of Democracy Now's video report of the incident conducted by the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Special Agent Lindsay Wohl's sworn affidavit states that I was there as a journalist. Wohl wrote, quote, Amy Goodman can be seen on the video identifying herself and interviewing protesters about their involvement in the protest, unquote. The criminal complaint was approved by Assistant State's Attorney for Morton County, Gabrielle J. Goder. To date, none of the private security personnel shown in the video, both assaulting protesters and commanding their dogs to attack them, have been charged or arrested. Democracy Now! Is consulting with attorneys in North Dakota as well as at the Center for Constitutional Rights. CCR Legal Director Bahar Azmi said, quote, this is clearly a violation of the First Amendment, an attempt to repress this important political movement by silencing media coverage, unquote. We'll have more on the Dakota Access Pipeline after headlines. In news from the campaign trail, Hillary Clinton canceled plans to visit California today after falling ill with what her doctor described as pneumonia and dehydration. On Sunday, Clinton was seen abruptly leaving a ceremony in Lower Manhattan commemorating the 9/11 attacks. Video showed her stumbling as Secret Service agents helped her into a van. Clinton was taken to the Manhattan apartment of her daughter Chelsea and emerged about 90 minutes later, waving to reporters.
How are you feeling, Secretary Clinton?
Great. Feeling great.
What happened? Just a second. Give us a little statement.
It's a beautiful day in New York.
Hillary Clinton's doctor later said in a statement the candidate was being treated with antibiotics and was, quote, rehydrated and recovering nicely, unquote. Clinton's campaign says she'll rest at her home in Chappaqua, New York. Clinton canceled fundraising events planned for Los Angeles and San Francisco, as well as a scheduled appearance on The Ellen DeGeneres Show. The illness follows weeks of speculation and conspiracy theories about Clinton's health put forward by Donald Trump and other Clinton opponents. In August, Trump national spokeswoman Katrina Pearson claimed without evidence that Clinton was suffering from dysphagia, a form of brain injury. Hillary Clinton's illness came less than 2 days after she suggested half of Donald Trump's supporters are bigoted. Clinton made the comments Friday during a fundraiser at an LGBTQ event in New York.
We are living in a volatile political environment. You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
Donald Trump's campaign seized on Clinton's comment. This is Trump's running mate, Governor Mike Pence.
I campaign on a regular basis with Donald Trump. I campaign all across this country for Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton's low opinion of the people that support this campaign should be denounced in the strongest possible terms.
Hillary Clinton said in a statement Saturday she regretted calling half of Trump supporters bigots, but added, quote, what's really deplorable is that Donald Trump hired a major advocate for the so-called alt-right movement to run his campaign, and that David Duke and other white supremacists see him as a champion of their values, end quote. Rudolph Giuliani is defending Donald Trump's statement last week that the U.S. should have taken Iraq's oil as part of the spoils of war. The former New York City mayor, who's a top advisor to Trump, made the remark Sunday on ABC's This Week.
But he said leave a force back there and take it. leave a force back there and take it and make sure it's distributed in a proper way. And basically,
that's not legal, is it?
Of course it's legal. It's a war.
Governor Mike Pence released his 2015 tax returns Friday, showing the vice presidential candidate and his wife took in $113,000 last year. Hillary Clinton's 2015 tax returns show she and Bill Clinton earned $10.6 million in 2015, down from nearly $28 million the year before. Donald Trump has refused to make his tax returns public. In international news, the U.S. and Russia say warring factions in Syria are set to begin a 10-day ceasefire at sundown tonight. Secretary of State John Kerry said he reached the deal during talks in Geneva with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov.
Today, the United States and Russia are announcing a plan which we hope will reduce violence, ease suffering, and resume movement towards a negotiated peace and a political transition in Syria. And we believe that the plan, as it is set forth, if implemented, if followed, has the ability to provide a turning point, a moment of change.
Scores were killed in heavy fighting after news of the ceasefire broke. Witnesses said at least 61 died and over 100 people were wounded after a warplane bombed a market in Idlib. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said another 30 people were killed in Aleppo province. The ceasefire calls for Syria's government to stop bombing cities and allow humanitarian aid corridors. Russia will cease bombing all targets except for ISIS, and the U.S. will force the rebel groups it arms to break allegiance with a group that's pledged support for al-Qaeda. The U.S. and Russia may also begin joint bombing campaigns. Several previous ceasefires in Syria have collapsed. In New York City on Sunday, bells rang out at 8:46 a.m. to mark the moment 15 years ago that the first of two hijacked airplanes crashed into the World Trade Center. Thousands gathered Sunday in Lower Manhattan for a solemn ceremony marking the anniversary. Memorials were also held at the Pentagon and at the site in western Pennsylvania where a hijacked plane crashed on September 11, 2001. The Bush administration's former top environmental official has apologized for telling the public the air in Lower Manhattan was safe to breathe after the 9/11 attacks. Christine Todd Whitman was head of the Environmental Protection Agency in 2001. In the days after the World Trade Center towers collapsed, Whitman repeatedly stated there was no threat of toxic air pollution.
Everything we've tested for, which includes asbestos, lead, and VOCs, have been below any level of concern for the general public health.
Speaking to The Guardian, Whitman acknowledged for the first time that her statements put people's lives in jeopardy. She said, quote, "I'm very sorry that people are sick. I'm very sorry that people are dying. And if the EPA and I in any way contribute to that, I'm sorry," she said. Whitman's apology came as The Guardian reported the death toll among those sickened by the toxic fallout of Ground Zero will soon exceed the number of people killed on the day of the 9/11 attacks. In Chile's capital, Santiago, thousands marched to the city's main cemetery Sunday to mourn victims of the former dictatorship. On September 11, 1973, democratically elected President Salvador Allende died in the palace in a U.S.-backed coup, ushering in 17 years of brutal dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. Imprisoned Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning has begun a hunger strike to protest her prison conditions. In a statement, Manning said she would only consume water and medication until she's provided minimum standards of dignity, respect, and humanity. She's demanding a written promise from the Army that she will receive medically prescribed recommendations for her gender dysphoria. Manning is serving a 35-year sentence at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And in New York, students at the Brooklyn campus of Long Island University plan to walk out of classes at noon today to protest a lockout that's seen every single professor kicked off payroll and replaced. Over Labor Day weekend, just before the start of fall classes, all 400 faculty members at LIU's Brooklyn campus saw their health insurance cut and their email accounts frozen. They've been warned they could be permanently replaced. This is LIU professor Larry Banks.
University for 15 years, and I'm outside the gate because the administration has locked us out. This is the first time this has happened in the country, and I feel horrible. There has never, ever been the administration saying teachers can't teach. We won't allow it. That's never happened. Never happened before in the history of education in this country.
Last week, Long Island University's faculty union voted 226-10 against a labor contract that sought to slash pay for adjunct professors and failed to provide salaries comparable to those earned by colleagues at a satellite campus. The Faculty Senate overwhelmingly approved a no-confidence measure against LIU President Kimberly R. Klein. To see our full coverage of the LIU walkout, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show with major updates in the fight by Native Americans to stop the proposed $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline, which would carry about 500,000 barrels of crude oil a day from the Bakken oil fields of North Dakota through South Dakota, Iowa, and into Illinois. The project has faced months of resistance from the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and members of hundreds of other tribes from across the United States and Canada who flocked to North Dakota in what's being described as the largest unification of Native American tribes in decades. In a dramatic series of moves late Friday afternoon, a federal judge rejected the Standing Rock Sioux tribe's request for an injunction against the U.S. government over the Dakota Access Pipeline. Then the Army, the Department of Justice, and the Department of the Interior responded with a joint announcement that the Army Corps will not issue permits for Dakota Access to drill under the Missouri River until the Army Corps reconsiders its previously issued permits. In a statement, the Department of Justice said, quote, "Construction of the pipeline on Army Corps land bordering or under Lake Wahe will not go forward at this time," unquote. The federal agencies also asked the Dakota Access Pipeline Company to voluntarily cease construction 20 miles east and west of Lake Wahe. The government's intervention was welcomed by thousands of Native Americans who've gathered along the Cannonball River by the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation to resist the pipeline's construction. Here are some of their reactions.
Francine Garrow Hall. I'm with the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. I'm Minikoju, Itazipjo, and Hunkpapa bands of the Teton Lakota. I am very grateful because in our government-to-government relationship, the federal government is bound by treaty law to protect our interests. And I'm glad that they stepped up to the plate today and did that. I think all the American people need to recognize and they need to realize that this isn't a racial deal. This is something that impacts all of us. We all, as children of God, have a right to clean water. And that's what this fight is about. It's about recognizing that Mini Wichoni, water is life, and without it, we all die. And so we are protecting water for the future generations. I had to be here because it was my time to be accountable. 7 generations from now, I want my grandkids and their children to say, she stood so that we could have clean water.
My name is Bill Peacott. I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe. Like everybody else, I think I'm pretty happy with the decision for them to step in. I know that maybe it's not the end of the battle, but at least today, you know, we celebrate a small victory. You know, there are still things to be considered, and I think at least for me, it appears that they want to do things fairly. Hopefully there'll be more tribal consultation, and not just with Standing Rock, but with all tribal nations in the future. Maybe this will show, you know, the United States and the world that I think Native American people are tired of being walked on, tired of being taken for granted, tired of being invisible. and that we're going to stand up for ourselves. I've seen some atrocious things to me, you know. The girl that was bit in the chest was my cousin, you know, and there were pictures on Facebook of that, and I was heartbroken for her, you know. I think I can say that I'm proud of the way we've behaved and we've acted throughout this.
Florice Whitebowl from Standing Rock. My father's from here, Standing Rock. I'm a student at Sitting Bull College. It's not a solid victory right now, but it's just the weight, feeling that weight that I've been carrying for the past couple months now, it's lifting, and I feel like I could breathe right now.
The Native Americans who call themselves protectors, not protesters, have repeatedly forced the Dakota Access Pipeline Company to stop construction by locking themselves to machinery. On Saturday, September 3rd, over Labor Day weekend, Dakota Access Pipeline Company unleashed dogs and pepper spray on Native Americans as they attempted to stop the company from destroying a sacred tribal burial site.
These people are just threatening all of us with these dogs. And that woman over there, she was charging them, and it bit somebody right in the face.
The dog has blood in its nose and its mouth.
And she's still standing here threatening me.
Why are you letting her dog go after the protesters? It's covered in blood.
That was September 3rd. To see our full report, go to democracynow.org. The bulldozers and company security guards were ultimately forced to retreat. We're going to break. When we come back, we'll go to North Dakota to speak with Dave Archambault, the chair of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and Jan Hasselman in Seattle, Washington, staff attorney with Earth Justice, who brought the tribe's lawsuit to federal court. Stay with us.
Frágil como un volante en los techos de barrancas, jugaba el niño Luchín con sus manitos moradas, con la pelota de trapo, con el gato y con el perro. El caballo lo miraba en el agua de sus ojos, se bañaba el verde claro, gateaba su cortada con el potito embarrado, con la pelota de trapo.
Anna Tijoux singing a cover of Victor Jara's Luchín. It was released on Sunday on 9/11. 9/11, 1973. Salvador Allende, the democratically elected leader of Chile, died in the palace as the Augusto Pinochet forces came to power. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue our coverage of the standoff at Standing Rock, where thousands of Native Americans from hundreds of tribes across the United States and Canada are resisting construction of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. It's the largest unification of Native American tribes in decades. Well, for more on Friday's district court ruling in D.C., in the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's lawsuit against the U.S. government, and the White House's dramatic intervention less than an hour later, we're joined now by two guests. Dave Archambault is chair of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. He's joining us via Democracy Now! Video stream from North Dakota. And in Seattle, Washington, we're joined by Jan Hasselman, staff attorney with Earth Justice, representing the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe in its lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers over the Dakota Access Pipeline. Let's go first to Standing Rock. Chairman Dave Archambault, your response to what happened on Friday.
First, we were disappointed by the judge's decision, but then a few minutes later, we were elated. It was something that was encouraging because we knew that we were standing for something that was not right. And there were a lot of prayers, and I think those prayers were answered. And so it was a good feeling, and it still is a good feeling knowing that there's an opportunity for us to look at public policy and reform so that our indigenous lands and our indigenous rights are not infringed on. And with the ruling, I know that it was something that we had to do. I felt that all along the deck was stacked against us, but we had to do it to start building awareness, and we had to look at whatever laws we could to get the issue to the forefront. And it's just an ongoing battle. We'll appeal. We are appealing, and we're going to be asking for a full EIS, environmental impact study, for the project. And the work isn't done. We have a long ways to go, and we're going to be doing whatever we can.
I want to go back to the joint statement released Friday, just 15 minutes after the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe was defeated in federal court. The statement released Friday by the Obama administration, by the Departments of Interior, Justice, and the Army Corps of Engineers. It reads, quote, "This case has highlighted the need for a serious discussion on whether there should be nationwide reform with respect to considering tribes' views on these types of infrastructure projects. Therefore, this fall, we'll invite tribes to formal government-to-government consultations on two questions. One, within the existing statutory framework, what should the federal government do to better ensure meaningful tribal input into infrastructure-related reviews and decisions and the protection of tribal lands, resources, and treaty rights? And two, should new legislation be proposed to Congress to alter that statutory framework and promote those goals?" Chairman Dave Archambault, what does that mean to you?
It means there's a crack in the door, and we're going to start nudging, and we're going to see what we can do to open it as wide as we can so that our indigenous rights and our indigenous lands are no longer infringed on.
I want to go to Jan Hasselman for a moment. You're the lawyer who brought the case of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe to federal court. Can you just describe for us this dramatic series of events that took place on Friday?
Yeah, well, good morning, Amy. Thanks for having me back. Everybody knew that the court case was an uphill struggle. And we took our best shot, but we were reading this opinion that denied the relief we were asking for, and it was crushing because everyone had put a lot of effort into that. And then 15, 20 minutes later, the world turned upside down with this announcement from the administration, which is really what the tribe has been asking for all along. This is a situation that calls out for intervention and leadership at the highest levels to de-escalate the tensions out there, to address the really fundamental unfairness of the process. And so we were very heartened that the Obama administration stepped in and took that leadership role, said there's going to be a timeout on additional permitting, and we're going to have the kind of conversation that the tribe has been asking for from the very beginning.
Now, just to understand this, I don't know if this is unprecedented. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe was fighting the Justice Department in federal court. So it was the Justice Department lawyers who experienced this victory for them when the federal court ruled against the tribe. Was it, 15 minutes later that their own department, the Justice Department, together with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of the Interior, made this announcement?
Yeah, that's right. This is a pretty stunning move that changes the equation of where are we going from here. We're going to take them at their word that this is going to be a serious top-to-bottom review of the permitting, and what that means under the law is that they're going to have to consider all of the options that are on the table, and one of those options is not building a pipeline. Another option is put it back in its original route north of Bismarck, and let's see how much the politicians in Bismarck are excited about crude oil pipelines when it's their water supply that's at risk instead of the tribes. So all of that is going to take a little bit of time, and the tribe is ready to begin engaging in that process and begin having that conversation.
But just to be clear, when it comes to the Dakota Access Pipeline, the statement, the triple statement from Army, Justice, and Interior, so clearly from the White House, from on high, is asking the pipeline to voluntarily not build on the places, for example, that we recorded that standoff on September 3rd on Labor Day weekend, where the pipeline security unleashed dogs and pepper spray on the Native Americans who were there. They're asking them to voluntarily not build. They can build?
Well, let's be clear about exactly what the statement was. So the area where the federal government has the clearest permitting authority is the tunnel underneath Lake Oahe, and they've said they're not going to issue that without a permit, so they can't do that work. They've asked the company to stand down on construction on 20 miles on either side. This will be a test of the company's good faith in the process if they heed that. Now, we are going to be asking the Federal Appeals Court to enforce that 20-mile no-build zone through court order. We'll be filing that today, and we'll see where that happens. But to the extent that the company needs additional permits from the Army Corps, it would seem to me that thumbing their nose at them and ignoring this request would be a very bad strategy.
Dave Archambault, can you describe what happened on Thursday in preparation? The governor of North Dakota called out the National Guard, and then describe the scene in preparation for the court ruling decision. Could you then describe the scene? Increase in road checkpoints, which you've had for a long time now. Describe that scene for us and what happens to people as they drive.
Okay, Amy, when the governor first set up the blockade and started rerouting our members, I immediately called him and I asked him to take the blockade down. And I had multiple calls with him, and my request was the same every time. In our discussions, I had let him know that you can, if your concern is safety, and that's what he said, his concern is safety with pedestrians on Highway 1806. I said we could add additional signs, and you can allow people to go through, but just have them be aware. Give them notice that there may be some people on the roads, and we could have multiple signs to slow the traffic. Now, before this, Amy, when everything first started, on Standing Rock, I have about 8 officers total for my reservation, and there's 2.3 million acres, 12 communities, 8 officers, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, with working 5 days a week, 12-hour shifts. And as the camp began to grow, attention with officers began to circle around the community of Cannonball. We're close to camp. So I made a request for additional BIA law enforcement, not to patrol or to observe or to monitor the camp, but to assure that safety is throughout Standing Rock. So I was able to get 31 additional BIA officers, and it helped because
Bureau
now
of Indian Affairs.
Yep, Bureau of Indian Affairs, law enforcement, and it helped because there's safety in the communities, and that was my concern for my nation, was to make sure that safety is a priority. Now, when the governor made the announcement, I called him immediately and I asked what this was about, and the resources that the governor has within the state with Highway Patrol and within the counties, Burleigh County and Morton County, were all focused on the blockade. And so what he had said was that it's not a full-blown National Guard deployment. It's minimal. And what it is going to be used for is to inform traffic. We're going to open up the blockade so they can go through, but just inform them. This was an ask that I had, to allow people to come through 1806 rather than rerouting them. And the Highway Patrol, the law enforcement in Burleigh County and Morton County can then be used throughout the state, throughout other parts of the state. So I understand where the governor was coming from, and there's a lot of emphasis that the National Guard is deployed and we're gonna shut this camp down, and that wasn't the case. The National Guard that's manning the blockade and allowing people to go through 1806, they're really friendly guys, and they're informing people that there may be pedestrians on the road. Just be cautious. It's 25, 30 miles down the road. There's an encampment there, and everybody knows what's going on.
Is facial recognition technology being used?
That's a crazy question, Amy, and I'm glad you asked it, because when you have a lot of people in an area, there's all this paranoia that is present, and we don't have to be paranoid anymore. We need to be proud of who we are. This is a big time in history. We need to hold our chins high and show our faces. We're not doing anything wrong. And if facial recognition technology is out there, I would doubt that it's here. What all authorities have to do is go on Facebook, go on to Democracy Now! Videos, and they'll see people's faces there. And that's where authorities are getting information. The people who are videoing incidents determine. We create the evidence on ourselves with our iPhones and social media. I would highly doubt that facial recognition is something. We have our own websites, we have our own Facebook pages. We give all the information that is out there to the authorities through social media.
But for example, if someone has a warrant out for their arrest, that's the place where they will be picked up. If they're just driving, they won't be. But if there is a roadblock, for example, a checkpoint, that's where they get picked up.
Well, if they have something that they've done wrong, you should own up to you should be accountable for yourself. And if there's a warrant for your arrest, why are you out? Why aren't you going to authorities and getting it taken care of?
Well, I want to read a joint statement released Friday by the Obama administration, which notes that, quote, "We fully support the rights of all Americans to assemble and speak freely. We urge everyone involved in protest or pipeline activities to adhere to the principles of nonviolence. Of course, anyone who commits violent or destructive acts may face criminal sanctions from federal, tribal, state, or local authorities. The Departments of Justice and the Interior will continue to deploy resources to North Dakota to help state, local, and tribal authorities and the communities they serve better communicate, diffuse tensions, support peaceful protest, and maintain public safety." You know, in the case, for example, in my own case, Chairman Archibald, where the state of North Dakota has issued a warrant for my arrest. It's for covering the protest on September 3rd. And as I understand it, others who are wanted for that is where the point of contact is, where you won't be picked up on the road in general. But if there is a checkpoint in that interaction, that's what happens.
Well, again, you know, I think that there are things that are legal and are completely wrong, and it's okay to stand up for them. There are things that are illegal but are completely right, and it's okay to stand up for them. And so if you do something in that way, like you did, Amy, it's okay. It's good, because the coverage that you did is valuable to the cause. And so when you do something, when you commit an act and it's viewed as illegal, but everybody knows there's a natural law that it's right, then it's okay to own up.
Chairman Archibald, you yourself were arrested, is that right, at one of the protests?
Yes, I was.
So what are your plans now? The decision came down against the tribe, but then the Obama administration released this joint statement of Army, Interior, and Justice. Are the camps going to continue? You've got thousands of people now at the camps and more joining every day.
Yeah, like I said, the door is cracked open. And so what I feel is until it's blown wide open and this pipeline no longer infringes on our lands and on our rights. I can't tell you an end date, but I know that there are more tribes, there are more organizations. It's worldwide now. People coming from all over. We just had tribes from Ecuador, and the chief from Ecuador come in, and the same concerns. You know, there's this building awareness on indigenous people and the lands that they have and the protection that they want to offer. This awareness is coming around. We have people from Hawaii trying to protect their mountain, their sacred mountains, from development, from corporations or the government. So it's a shared concern, and it's what I like to call it's a spirit awakening. And so to try to say
has the Dakota Access Pipeline folks told you they are going to voluntarily stop the construction and the bulldozing?
I haven't spoke to Dakota Access Pipeline folks, and that's a good question for them.
Mm-hmm. And Jan Hasselman, as the lawyer who has been fighting the pipeline, have you gotten any word?
We don't know. I think they were probably as surprised as we were with the announcement on Friday. Like I said, we'll be going back to the court and having that conversation. So I think the week ahead, we'll know a lot more about where things are going.
I want to thank you both for being with us. Dave Archambault, chair of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, speaking to us from Bismarck, North Dakota, and Jan Hasselman, attorney with Earth Justice, speaking to us from Seattle, Washington. When we come back, we'll hear voices of that largest gathering that we've seen of Native tribes in decades. We'll hear, among others, from Indigenous leader Winona LaDuke. Stay with us.
We don't pretend we're perfect, but we have endearing features. We're honest and we're always kind to God's four-footed creatures. Dogs and horses, hamsters, rabbits, little furry things. Lousy Europeans can't appreciate the pleasure that a little kindness brings. We're a nation of animal lovers. When Greeks are being tortured, then we tend to hold our peace. We often like to spend our summer holidays in Greece. Cats and ponies, budgies, moths and hairy caterpillars. Lousy Europeans can't appreciate the pleasure that these little creatures give us. We're a nation of animal lovers. When there's massacres in Vietnam, we just avert our gaze. But we're tender-hearted to a fault with alley cats and strays. Remember how the nation nearly had a nervous spasm, breathlessly anticipating giant panda's pleasure in a cuddly orgasm. We're a nation of animal lovers.
We are a nation of animal lovers by Ewan McCall. Happy birthday to producer Sam Alcoff's father, Larry Alcoff. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. While Democracy Now! Was covering the standoff at Standing Rock earlier this month on Labor Day weekend, we spoke to Winona LaDuke, longtime Native American activist, executive director of the group Honor the Earth. She lives and works on the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota. She spent years successfully fighting a pipeline similar to Dakota Access, the Sandpiper Pipeline. We met her right outside the Red Warrior camp, where she has set up her teepee. Red Warrior is one of the encampments where thousands of Native Americans representing hundreds of tribes from across the U.S. and Canada are currently resisting the pipeline's construction. Her teepee is painted with animals that are threatened by climate change. We began by asking Winona LaDuke why communities are now protesting the pipeline.
It's time to end the fossil fuel infrastructure. I mean, these people on this reservation, they don't have adequate infrastructure for their houses. They don't have adequate energy infrastructure. They don't have adequate highway infrastructure, and they're looking at a $3.9 billion pipeline that will not help them. It will only help oil companies. So that's why we're here. You know, we're here to protect this land.
Explain what happened to the Sandpiper Pipeline, the one that you protested, the one that you opposed.
What we opposed, yeah. So for 4 years, the Enbridge company said that they absolutely needed a pipeline that would go from Clearbrook, Minnesota to Superior, Wisconsin. That was the critical and only possible route. They proposed a brand new route that would go through the heart of our best wild rice lakes and territory, skirting the reservations but within our treaty territory. They did not consult with us, and they made some serious errors in their process. They underestimated what was going to happen. happen there. And so for 4 years, we battled them in the Minnesota regulatory process, which is a process which is more advanced and slightly more functional than North Dakota's regulatory process, which, from what I can see, is largely non-existent. And in that process, we attended every hearing, we intervened legally, we rode our horses against the current of the oil, we had ceremonies, and they canceled the pipeline. That's what they did after 4 years. Very, very ardent opposition by Minnesota citizens, tribal governments, tribal people, on that line. And that pipeline, big problem. We still have 6 pipelines in northern Minnesota to go to Superior, the furthest inland port. But the new proposals are not going to happen there. Enbridge has said that they still want to continue with their proposals for Line 3. The first pipeline they want to abandon. The beginning of a whole new set of problems in North America, the abandoning of 50-year-old pipelines with no regulatory clarity as to who is responsible. And so we are opposing them on that they cannot abandon and they still cannot get a new route. But when they announced that, in my area, I could have said, hey, good luck, y'all. We beat it here. Good luck. But no, we said we're going to follow them out here, too, because we believe that, we could spend our lives fighting one pipeline after another, but someone needs to challenge the problem and say, this is not the way to go, America. This is not the way to go for any of us. So also we came out here to support these people.
So talk about everyone who's out here.
There are a lot of people out here, It's very funny because I feel like I've been like the Standing Rock switchboard, the travel guide for the past 2 weeks. Everybody hits me up on Facebook, calls me up, hey, LeDuc, I want to bring out this. I got some winter coats. What should I do? I was like, oh my gosh, So a lot of people are coming here united, So what I know is out here is like, I go walk in here and I'd seen people from from Wounded Knee in 1973. I seen people I worked with in opposing uranium mining in the Black Hills in the 1970s and 80s, out here. I mean, I've been at this a while. It's like old home week out here. I've seen people from Oklahoma that oppose the Keystone XL pipeline in Nebraska, and I've seen people from, out in our territory that are opposing the pipelines here. The tribal chairman of Fond du Lac is here, and, a whole host of, native and non-native people. And there are a lot of people that just, do not believe that this should happen anymore in this country, that are very willing to put themselves on the line. Non-Indian people, as well as tribal members, and they are here, and it is a beautiful place to defend.
For people who are watching in New York and Louisiana, in California and India, China and South Africa, why does this matter to them?
This matters because it's time to move on from fossil fuels. This is the same battle that they have everywhere else. Each day or each week there's some new leak, there's some new catastrophe in the fossil fuel industry, as well as the ongoing and growing catastrophe of climate change. The fact that there is no rain in Syria has directly to do with these fossil fuel companies. All of the catastrophes that are happening elsewhere in the world has to do with the fact that, North America is retooling its infrastructure and going after the dirtiest oil in the world, the tar sands oil and the oil out of North Dakota, the fracked oil. Rather than, they were working with Venezuela. It also has to do with crushing Venezuela, because Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. And rather than do business with Venezuela, they were bound and determined to take oil from places that did not want to give it up and create this filthy infrastructure. So this carbon, this oil is very heavy in carbon and will add hundreds of millions of tons of CO2 to the environment if these pipelines are allowed through. So that is, it affects everybody.
Now, some tribes are for the pipeline. Can you describe the division?
I don't know that I would say some tribes are for it. I would say some interests in Indian country have been for the pipeline. I mean, historically, the 3 affiliated tribes is an oil-producing tribe, but they came down here to support the opposition to the pipeline. They came down there, their whole tribal council came down here a couple of days ago. But the fact is that, some tribes have been forced into production of fossil fuels. 85% of the Navajo economy, for instance, is fossil fuel based. About the same percentage of the Fort Berthold economy is fossil fuel based. So, just to give a little historic picture, you come out here with your smallpox and you wipe out 95% of the people, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people in the early 1800s. They live along these villages, just trying to hang in there. Then you come out here and you flood their lands, and the agricultural crops that they produced are now owned by Monsanto and Syngenta as trademarked, varieties that they created, right? And then you're out here in North Dakota, and everybody in the country flies over North Dakota and looks down and says, well, that's North Dakota. Nobody comes out here. And so stuff continues out here for 100 years where these people are treated like third-class citizens, where they have no running water in their houses and they have oil companies coming out here and you have high rates of abuse and violence against women and children, and it accelerates and increases in the oil fields until you have an epidemic of drugs, which now hits this community. This community doesn't get any benefit from oil, but the meth and heroin that came out of those fields is here. Because those dealers came up here and then they saw these Indian people and they said, well, we'll just go there. And so these reservations are full of it, And then you say, to that tribe up there, they say, the BIA, cuts some backyard deals and starts oil extraction. And so then the
Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then you end up with oil, you end up with haves and have-nots in the oil fields. And you end up with the tribe that now has oil revenues that are coming in. And they look out there, frankly, and they say, things haven't been going too well for us, so we're going to sign a few more of these leases because, after all, nothing has ever worked out well for us. And so we're going to get a little bit of money. And that's how you get, you force people into that with a gun to their head, and then they end up destroying their land, which is what is happening up there on that reservation. And they've had huge investigations into corruption at the leadership. But, you force poor people. You force people into that situation, and it's a perfect storm.
You've talked and written about Native Americans having PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah, we have ongoing. I didn't finish it. I still have it. You say Enbridge and I get this little quirk. And because the Indian wars are far from over out here. But, what you get is intergenerational trauma, is what is known as historic trauma. And other people have it, but you have a genetic memory, and you look out there and you see, every day you wake up and you see that your land was flooded. And that big power line that runs through this land, that doesn't benefit you. You still have to, that everything that is out here was done at your expense, but you still have to pay for it. And every day you go out there and you got a roadblock, that the white people put up coming into your reservation. And every day you go out there and you look at your houses and you see that you've got crumbling infrastructure and nobody cares about it. And you got a meth epidemic and you got the highest suicide rates in the country, but nobody pays attention. And so you just try to survive. That's what you're trying to do. Like 90% of my community, generally, I would say is just trying to survive. In my community, we have rice. We still have our wild rice, and we can go and we can harvest wild rice, and we can be Anishinaabe people. We can still live off of our land. These people have a much tougher time, living off of their land. Their buffalo were wiped out, But this here is their stand. This is their stand. They got a chance to not have one more bad thing happen to them. And from my perspective is that $3.9 billion pipeline, these guys don't need a pipeline. What they need is solar. What they need is wind. Look at this wind. What they need, they have class 7 wind out here. What they need is solar on all their houses, solar thermal. They need housing that works for people. They need energy justice. This is this chance, America, to say, look, this community does not need a pipeline. What this community needs is real energy independence. They call this energy independence, shoving a pipeline down people's throats so that Canadian oil companies can benefit and, a bunch of people the world can worsen. That is not energy independence. Energy independence is when you have solar. Energy independence is when you have wind. Energy independence is when you have some control over your future. That's what these people want.
That was Winona LeDuc, longtime Anishinaabe activist from White Earth Reservation, northern Minnesota. That same day, though, right next to the Red Warrior camp protesting the pipeline, we spoke to longtime Lakota water and land rights activist Deborah White-Plume, born and raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, living along the banks of Wounded Knee Creek. I asked her to talk about what the Dakota Access Pipeline means to her.
What it means to me is that it pushes us further over the tipping point of not only fossil fuel extraction, but the desecration of Mother Earth and the exploitation of Native peoples in the area, as well as the threat to drinking water. Where I live 6 hours from here, when I turn on my tap, the water that comes out is from the Missouri River. It's a 50-50 mix with the Oglala Aquifer and the Missouri River, because at home our aquifer is badly contaminated by decades of uranium mining. So there's only portions of the aquifer on the Pine Ridge Reservation that pass the Environmental Protection Agency's maximum contaminant level for alpha emitters. So we have to mix half and half with the Missouri River water.
And what would happen to the Missouri River water?
Well, if the pipeline is put in, it's going to leak or spill or burst or explode, and that oil is going to get into the water. And Dakota Access Pipeline says they're going to bury it 30 feet under, and they're assuring everybody that it's going to be safe. But I think Western science doesn't really know everything it thinks it knows. And we need to make our decisions based on what's best for Mother Earth and our coming generations. And that includes protecting our water. Water is under threat all over the world. Right now, there are people who have no access to clean drinking water.
Do you call yourself a protester?
No, I call myself, first and foremost, I'm just a regular human being. I'm a mother and a grandmother, a great-grandmother. I'm Lakota. I'm a woman, and water is the domain of the women in our nation. And so it's our privilege and our obligation to protect water. So, you know, if somebody wants to label me, I guess it would be water protector.
You go way back to the Pine Ridge Reservation where you live today, 1973. Could you describe what happened then?
Sure. What happened then was the Indian Reorganization Act government, which is an act of Congress in place in 1934, governs most Native nations in the United States. While our IRA government at that time was very oppressive to Lakota people. They were keeping us from having jobs or homes or whatever few services the federal government provided because we held on to the Lakota way of life. And we also wanted to reclaim not only our identity but our lands and the care of our land and the responsibility of caring for our land. And at that time, the tribal president was Dick Wilson, and he had been working with the federal government to sign away 1/8 of our homeland to the federal government. And it just happened to be where there was a lot of what the fat taker calls resources, and they want to mine it, you know, coal, gas, oil, uranium, whatever it may be, water. And so we put up a ruckus and we said, no, you're not going to do that because our coming generations need that. And so there were a lot of shootouts and armed struggle going on in those days. And in the so-called border towns around us, which we call occupied territory, Indians were getting killed, and their murderers were not being held for justice. They were charged with the lowest felony there could be, doing 2 years of probation, and it was just enough was enough. You know, it was a moment in time. There was a women's movement, there was a civil rights movement, there was the Vietnam War stuff going on, and we just said that's enough for us too. We're not going to take this anymore, and we stood up and we fought. You know, we had to fight our own government, and they called in the FBI and the marshals and the army. Basically, it was a military occupation of our homeland.
And what happened then?
Well, Wounded Knee was liberated by relatives from the 4 directions, and the military came in and surrounded the little tiny village of Wounded Knee, and the rest is history. But we were able to get our spiritual way of life removed as a criminal act in American law. Prior to that, it had been a crime to practice our way of life. We have many people that went to prison in those days or were committed to, held in, and died at state mental institutions for having a sacred pipe or conducting any of our ceremonies.
Lakota leader Deborah Whiteplume of the Pine Ridge Reservation speaking from Red Warrior. Special thanks to Laura Gaddis, John Hamilton, Dennis Moynihan. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.